Welcome to Crimson Legacy Historians, where the past is not just remembered, but brought back to life with depth and clarity. Dawn breaks over Karak 1190 BC. You stand where tourists stand today, camera in hand, marveling at columns that pierce the sky like stone prayers. You see grandeur, civilization, the work of gods. But beneath your feet, in the temple's lowest chamber, archaeologists found something in 1923 that made them stop digging for 3 days. A fragment of limestone, hidden, deliberate, scratched into its surface, barely visible even under lamplight. Child-sized handprints, dozens of them pressed into wet plaster along a corridor that led absolutely nowhere. Small fingers, desperate pressure, and beside them carved in crude hieratic script, the informal writing of common people, a single phrase repeated 17 times. Mut does not hear us, Mut the mother goddess, protector of children, guardian of the innocent. Why would children dedicated to her, to the divine mother herself, carve a message saying she couldn't hear them? What were they trying to tell us from 3000 years away? The priest said these girls were blessed. The official records, stone inscriptions polished smooth, painted in gold and lapis, called them pure ones, divine brides, chosen of the gods. Beautiful words, but sometimes the most beautiful words hide the ugliest truths. In 1923, British archaeologist Margaret Murray was excavating the basement archives of the Temple of Mut in Leeksaw. Routine work cataloging pottery shards, measuring foundation stones. Then she found a sealed jar, clay, undecorated, deliberately hidden behind a false wall in a storage room that hadn't been opened in over 2 millennia. Inside papyrus letters, 17 of them, she tried to show her findings to the Egyptian Antiquity Service. They confiscated the jar, classified the contents. 3 senior Egyptologists, respected scholars, men who'd spent their lives translating temple texts, refused to work on it. One wrote in his diary, "Some truths are better left buried." The jar and its contents remained sealed in a Cairo warehouse for 71 years. What was in those letters, and why did the people who read them wish they hadn't? Look, if you're the kind of person who thinks documented history matters more than comfortable myths, you're in the right place. Every subscription to Crimson Historians helps us access archives, translate primary sources, and bring voices like these back from silence. Hit that button, then let's go back, because what happened next is worse than you think. Egypt, New Kingdom period, 1550 to 1077 BC. The height of power, the Golden Age. You've seen the movies, the glory, the divine right of kings. But here's what they don't tell you in museums. Egyptian temples weren't just religious sites. They were corporations. The Temple of Ammon at Karnak alone controlled 81,000 workers, owned 421,000 head of cattle, managed 83 ships, held more land than the pharaoh himself. These numbers are from the Wilbur Papyrus sitting right now in the Brooklyn Museum. You can go see it. Read the bureaucratic precision of ancient accountants listing property like inventory. The priests weren't holy men. They were landlords with God's names on their lips. Here's how the system worked. A farmer takes a loan from the temple. Copper for tools, grain for planting. The priests smile. The gods provide, they say. The interest compounds, always in the temple's favor. First harvest, not enough to cover the debt. Next year, still not enough. Third year, the priests arrive. The debt has tripled. The farmer has 3 options: lose his land, enter debt slavery, his entire family for generations, or dedicate his daughter. The priests use softer words. She will live in the house of the divine. She will be blessed beyond measure. The official term was entire, servant of the god, practical reality, unpaid labor for life. In Deir el Medina workers' village, archaeologists found contracts, actual legal documents, fathers signing over daughters. One reads, in year 3 of Ramesses IX, the farmer Ammon, being unable to repay 15 daimon of copper, does give his daughter Neferti to the house of Ammon for perpetual service. Neferti was 9 years old. The contract lists her age, her village, the debt amount, everything itemized, legal, witnessed. Her child traded for 15 deben of copper, about 3 months of wages. But here's what doesn't make sense. These girls weren't doing menial labor. Many were taught to read, to write, skills 90% of Egypt would never learn. Some became God's wives of Ammon. They managed temple accounts, commanded hundreds of servants, wore gold, lived in luxury, power, education, wealth. So why the handprints in hidden corridors? Why that message, "Mut does not hear us," carved 17 times? Why did Margaret Murray's jar contain letters written in secret, describing things the priests never recorded? Something doesn't add up. The answer is in what the priests called purification. If the thought of a 9-year-old signed away like property doesn't make you want to remember her name, then history has already forgotten her. Don't let it. That's why we're here. Stay with me. 1896, British archaeologist Flinders Petrie excavates a priest's tomb at Abydos. Inside a papyrus scroll, a manual instructions for temple initiation rites. The document is in the British Museum right now. Catalogue number EA 100,042, Middle Egyptian Procedural Clinical, like an instruction manual for assembling furniture, except it's not furniture. The text reads, "On the day of her entering, the girl shall be bathed in the sacred pool. Her garments shall be removed in the presence of the Wab priests. She shall be examined for purity of body." That word, examined. The text continues, "Her hair shall be removed that no impurity remain. She shall speak the oath before Armon. My body is the property of the god. My will is his will." She would be 8 years old, 10, maybe 12, standing naked in a room of adult men, repeating words she didn't understand, legally binding herself to a life she never chose. But here's where it gets strange. After initiation, these girls had access to restricted areas of the temple, sacred spaces where even nobles couldn't enter. They handled ritual objects, learned astronomy, mathematics, music. One inscription from Karnak lists a woman named Nefertiti as chief of the harem of Ammon, who administered temple accounts and commanded 300 servants. Power but no freedom. They could manage treasuries but couldn't leave the temple grounds. Could read hieroglyphs but couldn't write to their families. Could command servants but couldn't say no to priests. In the 1960s, Danish archaeologist Lisa Manko was studying Temple Ostra, broken pottery shards that ancient Egyptians used as notepads. She found medical prescriptions, dozens of them, all for young women in temples, treatments for genital trauma, remedies to prevent forced conception, instructions for midwives attending girls as young as 11 through childbirth. One Ostracan reads, "For the girl who bleeds after the god's visitation, grind acacia leaves with honey, apply to the wound, bind with clean linen." The god's visitation, that's what they called it. Among the prescriptions, Maniki found something else. A letter written on broken pottery and handwriting that slants like the writer was shaking. "To my sister, Mutmia, who serves in Mut's house, I am sorry I gave you to them. I am sorry I believed the priest when he said you would be blessed. Your mother weeps every night. I do not sleep. Forgive me. It's unsigned." The daughter never replied. Temple servants couldn't send mail. But wait, before you assume this was universal horror. It wasn't that simple. Some women in temples wielded genuine political power. Hatshepsut, the woman who became pharaoh and ruled Egypt for 20 years, started as a god's wife of Ammon. Other women entered temples voluntarily as adults, seeking education unavailable anywhere else, safety from forced marriage. So what made the difference? What separated the powerful priestesses from the girls carving desperate messages in hidden corridors? The answer is in one word the official records almost never say out loud. Age Margaret Murray's sealed jar, the one from 1923. It contains 17 letters written by a woman named Tentipet, who served in the Temple of Mut for 40 years. In them, she describes something the priests did every month. She calls it the monthly choosing. The official temple records carved in stone, painted in gold, never mention what that meant, but Tentipet wrote it down, and what she wrote stayed buried in that jar for 3,000 years. Margaret Murray's personal notes are archived at University College London. You can request them, fill out a form, wait 3 weeks, then sit in a quiet reading room while a librarian brings you a box. Inside her diary from the 1923 excavation season, March 12th entry. Found sealed jar today in false wall of southern storage chamber. Clay undecorated, deliberately hidden. Opened it in the field tent. Papyrus inside. Letters, I've read 3 so far. I wish I hadn't. March 15th showed the translations to Harrison and Blackman. Both refused to continue. Harrison said, "Some truths are better left buried, as if that matters, as if money means more than truth." The Egyptian Antiquities Service confiscated the jar, classified the contents, said the letters were likely forgeries despite dating to late New Kingdom Demotic script. The letters remained classified for 71 years. They were finally released in 1994. Most Egyptologists still haven't read them. The letters were written in Demotic, the informal cursive writing used for personal correspondence, not the formal hieroglyphs of monuments, the handwriting of someone writing for themselves, writing the truth. Tentipet's account: in my 12th year of service, I was chosen for the monthly rite. I had seen other girls chosen before me. They always returned silent, changed. They took us to the inner sanctum after the evening offerings. 5 of us that month. The youngest was 8 years old. She cried. The overseer struck her and said tears were impurity. The high priest wore the mask of Ammon, gold face, ram's horns. He said that God would speak through him, that we were blessed to receive the divine seed, that our bodies were vessels for the God's pleasure. He said this was holy. Murray wrote in her notes, the account describes systematic abuse disguised as religious duty, organized, scheduled, recorded in administrative logs like grain inventory. Because that's the truly evil genius of it. This wasn't chaos, it was organized. Temple records from Medinet Habu show rotation schedules, girls listed by name with marks indicating their service dates, ages listed alongside, the youngest recorded 7 years old. Not a mistake, not an aberration, policy, Tentip. It wasn't the only one writing. The jar contained other letters. Other women had found it. This hidden vessel in a forgotten storage room, and added their own testimonies. One wrote, "My name was Marat. Before they changed it to me, my father owed grain. The priest told him I would marry the god. He thought it meant honor. I was 11. There is no god here. Only men in masks who say they speak for gods." Another, "I have served for 16 years. I have borne 3 children to the god. They took each one from me after 3 years. My eldest daughter now serves as I do. I see her in the morning processions. She does not look at me. I think they told her I am dead." Murray's diary, March 15th, 1923. "I have read things today that make me question whether I should continue in Egyptology. These were children. This was systematic, recorded, managed. And we have been calling these temples sacred for 200 years of scholarship. Remember those handprints, the ones pressed into wet plaster in the dead-end corridor beneath the Temple of Mut. Tentipet's letters explained them. When girls were first brought to the temple for initiation, they were led through that passage, dark, narrow. The priests told them, "Press your hands here against the wall. You are reborn beyond this threshold. Your old self dies here." The girls pressed their hands into the wet plaster. Children, confused, scared, doing what they were told. But years later, when some girls tried to escape, and they did try, Tentipet writes about 3 attempts, they would return to that corridor, the only part of the temple without guard patrols. And they'd press their hands again. Same wall, same place, older hands now, larger, pressing harder, and they'd carve beside them, "Mut does not hear us. Wait, not a prayer, a witness statement, a message to whoever might find it. We were real, we existed, this happened to us, but here's what makes this even darker. The priests documented everything. They kept meticulous records, births, deaths, services rendered. They wrote about the girls' purity and devotion with the same bureaucratic efficiency they used to count grain stores. One administrative text from Karnak reads, Year 7, 3rd month of inundation, day 12. 5 new servants of Ammon received the god's blessing in the inner sanctuary. The god was pleased. 5 new servants, ages not mentioned, the god was pleased. They wrote it down, and not out of guilt, out of religious duty. They genuinely believed they were serving the gods. If you've gotten this far, you're carrying this now. Same as Murray did in 1923. Same as those girls did 0 years ago. You can close this video. You can forget you watched it. Or you can subscribe to Crimson Historians and help us make sure these voices, the ones they tried to seal in jars and bury in archives, never get silenced again. That's the choice. Make it. By the late New Kingdom around 1100 BC, something changed. The position of God's wife of Ammon transformed. It became exclusively held by royal women, pharaohs, daughters, princesses, and they were required to remain celibate. No marriage, no children, no divine unions. Why the change? The Papyrus Harris, now in the British Museum, one of the longest papyri ever found, was written by Ramesses Roman III around 1150 BC. In it, he describes reforms to temple administration. He uses careful language, abuses that had corrupted the sacred houses, impurities that had stained the divine order. He doesn't elaborate, but he restructures everything, changes who can hold power, who has access to whom. Egyptologist Gay Robbins argues this was a direct response to growing evidence of abuse, complaints that had reached even the pharaoh's court. The solution: put women from royal families, women with political power, education, bodyguards in charge, women who couldn't be touched, women who could say no. The irony: the victims became the solution. By 700 BC, the god's wife of Ammon essentially controlled thieves. She commanded armies, managed treasuries, held power rivaling the pharaohs in Upper Egypt, and she remained unmarried, celibate, untouchable, a position of genuine power born from centuries of abuse. But the lower-ranking temple girls, their situations improved only marginally. The reforms protected the women at the top. Everyone else the system ground on. Here's what's rarely discussed. Some of the most significant reforms came from a woman who lived through it herself. Shepan Roman II served as God's wife of Ammon from 700 to 650 BC. She was dedicated to the temple at age 9, lived there for 68 years, and when she gained power, she issued a decree carved into the walls at Karnak, still visible today on the north side of the sacred lake. Let no girl enter service before her 15th year. Let no priest claim authority over her person. Beyond ritual duties, let her family visit her thrice yearly. Let her voice be heard in disputes. She'd been 9 years old when they brought her to the temple. She remembered, and she used her power to change imperfectly, incompletely, but genuinely the system that had hurt her. After 600 BC, something strange happens in the archaeological record. We find fewer and fewer personal accounts from temple servants. No more hidden letters, no more carved messages, no more pottery shard confessions. Did abuse stop, or did record-keeping just become more centralized, more controlled? Did women stop writing their truths, or did someone make sure those truths would never be found? Margaret Murray's sealed jar remained classified for 71 years. When it was finally released in 1994, most Egyptologists ignored it. Too uncomfortable, too complicated, easier to write papers about theology and architecture, easier to marvel at the columns. Stand today in the hyper-style hall at Karnak. You can right now buy a plane ticket, walk through the same corridors where those girls walked, look up at those 134 columns reaching towards heaven, each one carved with prayers, hymns to the gods, stone fingers pointing at eternity. Beautiful, isn't it? Now remember, every stone was laid by hands that had no choice. Every prayer was sung by voices that couldn't say no. Every offering was made by people who were themselves offerings. We do this still. We build monuments and forget the bones beneath them. We see glory and ignore cost. We call things sacred because it's easier than calling them what they are. Margaret Murray wrote in her unpublished diary March 18, 1923, "Civilization is not measured by the height of its monuments, but by the depth of its compassion for those who had no choice but to build them. By that measure, we have learned nothing. How many systems today hide behind beautiful words? How many institutions claim divine authority while protecting the powerful? How many times have you heard this as tradition used to justify cruelty? The temples of Egypt are gone. The priests are dust. But the pattern that's immortal, you've just witnessed one of history's darkest truths, not because it was uniquely evil, but because it was so normal, so organized, so accepted, so thoroughly documented by people who thought they were doing holy work. If stories like this remind you how fragile humanity is, how easily we mistake cruelty for tradition, abuse for honor, silence for consent, then subscribe to Crimson Historians, because the only thing more dangerous than forgetting the past is refusing to see its reflection in the present. One last thing, remember Tentapet's letters, the 17 found in Murray's jar. The jar could hold 20. 3 are still missing. In 2003, an antiquities dealer in Cairo claimed to have found them. Said they'd been in a private collection since the 1920s, said he knew where they were. He died of a heart attack 3 days later before revealing the location.